Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Solving the Problem of Rare Disease session. I'm here interviewing Onno Faber. Hi, Onno.
Hi, Jason.
And a big warm welcome to everybody who has joined us for this session, as well as a big thank you to the organizers of today's event. It's been fantastic to see so many speakers and so many people who are passionate about rare diseases. So I'm here to talk to Onno about how rare disease is such a complex problem. And we know that every disease and every patient is an individual and is different. That creates a massive challenge that needs to be addressed, but is also one that comes with complications. And Onno has been pioneering really in this space, like so many, of new effective ways to approach rare disease and develop effective therapeutics. So Onno, before we get into that, I'd love to learn a bit more about you. And could you just tell us your own personal journey and background and how you came into the rare disease space?
Yeah, absolutely. I was born in Europe, in the Netherlands, and I live now in San Francisco. I basically have been an entrepreneur my entire life, like solving problems, hacking with code. And I started my first company in high school back in the 90s, building software to basically solve other companies' issues and problems. And after that, I studied architecture. I wanted to do something more tangible than just writing code. So did that, but found myself like back in the entrepreneurial space. Had a design thinking company for a while. And yeah, one of the companies I started in Europe made it to San Francisco, which is why I live here right now. That was in 2014, and that same year I got diagnosed with a rare disease called NF2 after losing my hearing on the left side. And it turned out I had a couple of tumors in my brain and spinal cord as a consequence of a genetic mutation. So that is how I got got an extra interest in this space and try to from there on out try to use my resources and everything I've learned in life to apply to the rare disease problem. So
maybe
yeah,
I could
go ahead.
on that point about your own rare disease that you've been tackling. So what was it like when you had that diagnosis? Like, what were the thoughts running through your head? I mean, obviously you chose to fight and like forge ahead and spread your experience to the benefit of others, but what went through your head in that moment?
Yeah, I mean, like probably a lot of people can relate to being diagnosed is a bit of a journey. So it was for me in the beginning. I was just having hearing problems, and at some point they discovered a tumor, and but that was not my diagnosis yet. It was just like a single tumor that was diagnosed. So later they found more tumors, and they said, "Oh, you have this genetic disease, and you should Google it." So I remember Googling it and seeing that patients sometimes go deaf, blind, and paralyzed. And it was extremely scary to read that. And yeah, it's definitely a life-changing moment where you are confronted with the vulnerability of life, and that everything you take for granted every day doesn't you shouldn't shouldn't take things for granted. And yeah, like I think I'm relatively optimistic person, so it didn't take too long to like realign myself, like, okay, what can I do with this problem? Like, how can I turn it into something positive? And basically like choosing to see the upside. And for me, the upside at that time was like, see, maybe there's something I can do that can not only help myself but lots of other people as well. And yeah, that is when I began with my journey into the rare disease world that is now, of course, like completely like all encompassing. Yeah, there is nothing else in my life than this problem.
Excellent. So that must have led you to helping set up All Stripes and more recently Rarebase. Could you tell us a bit more about them, both of those organizations, and the unique models that they're pioneering for developing and identifying new therapies for rare diseases?
Yeah, so the first one, All Stripes, really came after I realized how much clinical data was trapped in silos, and I organized a hackathon with a group here in San Francisco in 2017. We had like Google involved, 400 people signed up to work on NF2, on my disease, and in particular my data, as it turned out, because I sequenced my tumor. I did whole genome sequencing, and had been working on finding off-label therapies based on that data with friends of mine here in San Francisco. And I thought, like, okay, what if I open that data up to lots of people and see what they can do with it? So really, I got a bit frustrated in the organization process because there wasn't a lot of data that I could get into the hackathon other than my own. And I could get my own in because I basically had it sitting on a hard drive at home. So I could, I was kind of in control of that, which was like a game changer for me. So that's how the idea came about for All Stripes. What if we start collecting these medical records, clinical data from all the individual patients, and build a company to source that and bundle that all together. And so it's really it relies on the individual patients participating in that research. So instead of if a pharma company wants to work on a disease and they want to look at this data, they normally have to go to the hospitals and sign contracts with them, and it takes a long time. Every time they do it, you need to do it again. Like if another company wants to do it, they need to do the same thing again. So that was really about creating a central place for that. And more recently, I started another company called Rarebase, and Rarebase is much more focused on therapeutic discovery and development. So it's that that part is kind of broken in the current system, especially hurting rare disease groups, because the industry isn't set up to work on, for example, drug repurposing. Finding like a drug that is already on the market, is sitting on the shelf, maybe at your pharmacy next door. You don't know which one it is that may work for you. But if you do, you can just kind of get it and buy it. And nobody is really incentivized to discover these things. So that has to be an effort from the patient organizations funding that stuff. And once in a while, if you have a novel therapy and a novel idea that needs to be commercialized and developed and go to the market before patients can access it, it's too much driven by, I think, a profit industry. So, for example, Rarebase is a public benefit corporation, which at a board level, you need to make decisions with a public benefit in mind. So, personally, I think all pharma companies should be public benefit corporations, at least, because it's kind of weird to me how you can have a company that makes a potential treatment for people that are suffering and really sick, and you can do that purely based on profit incentives. So it really needs, that whole space needs a different model. And I think rare disease organizations can use help in professionalizing their efforts. And we kind of try to create a model that operates more like a biotech company would. So really trying to do things as fast and efficiently as possible, but also at the same time being able to work on these disorders on the non-commercial side of things. So we partner with foundations to to do that research. And if aspirin comes out, for example, as a potential therapy, we are incentivized to disclose that, like, yes, we found the treatment, instead of like, oh, that might hamper our commercialization opportunities for this other candidate. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but yeah, those are two things I started, and I'm really excited by the people that we are collaborating with and working with in the team. And it's definitely, the rare disease space has humbled me in many ways of how passionate people are that work in this industry. And yeah, you need to be right. It's that they're all like probably better jobs out there. So you need to have a good mix of like, yeah, wanting to change something and helping people, and have your passion, and at the same time, make all of our lives work and run in parallel.
Thanks, Onno. There's something you said that's a bit, I say, potentially controversial around pharma. Now, obviously, the big pharma companies out there, they've historically been focused on blockbuster drugs that are treating as many people as possible. Like billions of people are going to take this drug, like aspirin, for example. Like how many individuals can I get to take my drug as often as possible and as broadly as possible? And rare disease, by definition, is the opposite of that. So do you think that it's possible to make rare disease therapies and diagnostics more commercially appealing to some of these larger pharma, or do you think that it's actually the place of organizations like yours that are really going to be spearheading the efforts ultimately in collaboration with the different rare disease networks and charities?
Yeah, so I think the pharma industry, yeah, I don't actually want to talk negative about it, because I think it brought us a lot of things. Like, we have the modern healthcare and the medicine we have available is only possible because of that industry. Another thing to keep in mind is that most of the things that that you need to invest in and are a lot of people are working on don't actually work out. There's an enormous failure rate. So when a drug costs like $10,000 a month or something, that, I mean, it seems high, and maybe it is, but it also has to offset all those failures and risks that investors take. So like, as a whole, I think it does something really useful. The problem, though, with rare disease is the best thing that can happen for a rare disease is that you find a drug that is already on the market, that you don't have to take through the regulatory approval or the FDA, and you can just get it prescribed from your doctor if there is if you make a good case. That is the best scenario, and there is no commercial incentive to do that. So rare disease in particular, especially in the early stages of discovery, they need a different funding model, because first of all, you don't want to only look for novel therapies, because the best case scenario is, again, like something not novel, something that's just on the shelf. And I'm using a drug like that myself right now, and that is the best case. So we need a model that can be where you can be incentivized to also work on those things. And later, when there is something novel, you do need to take it through a pretty rigorous process, which can maybe cost $100 million, right? So there we need the market in order to come up with those funds. And I think in the rare disease space, there is more opportunity these days than there used to be. Like, there are incentives by the FDA to make it more appealing to work on rare diseases. And it is also, I think, if we look at the bigger picture, rare diseases are kind of a gateway to new types of therapies that are just not possible to develop in more common conditions. So, for example, also with Rarebase, and many groups are working on therapies for a single patient that are completely personalized, like the N of one therapies. And in some rare diseases, that is just opening up a new approach to look at medicine. And if we can make it work for one, we can create a process that repeats, and we can do the same thing for other patients too. And who knows how all this knowledge and experience transpiles to the bigger population.
So you mentioned something just now around your own personal journey again, and how you've benefited from some of the programs that you're trying to spread for your own treatment. So maybe as a case study, could you explain the drugs that you've tried out for your own condition and what you've found that's worked and how you went on that path? There might be some learnings for the audience.
Yeah, so I've been on 2 off-label medications so far. The first one was a drug, an oncology drug, and it was on the market for breast cancer. And we found clues in my genomic data to that drug may work on a certain pathway that was maybe involved with the tumor development, the tumor growth. So I took that drug for about 2 years, and frankly, like from that, I learned what it is like to weigh in like a side effect profile, toxicity, with the benefits of a treatment. And I learned it's especially when you have a more like chronic condition, and that is not immediately life-threatening. You cannot really go into remission. I cannot go into remission from these things. So it would have been a treatment for life. And the first one was pretty toxic when you consider the how long you would have to potentially be on that drug. So it was almost not worth it anymore. It also stopped working, but I also reached the point that like this is this is crazy. I can't do this anymore. I don't want it. I'm rather deaf than because deafness is the next thing I'm potentially facing. I'm rather deaf than continue on this drug. And the new drug I'm on is another experimental off-label treatment, and that one for me is like far less toxic, and it doesn't really have any negative kind of effects in my day to day. And it also has stabilized my tumors so far. And I get MRI scans every 3 months. So every 3 months, it's like another moment. It's a little scary, right? To kind of see the results of your scan and did the tumor grow or not. But yeah, it turned out that it did not, and that feels like magic, to be honest. Like seeing that you can take a drug that stabilizes this, particularly this tumor, and doesn't really seem to have many other side effects other than that. So it is the magical thing, and I know it's not going to work forever. So we're working on many different new ideas for what's after this, but I am very grateful for it, and I think it's kind of what I wish for everyone with a rare disease, to find something that's quickly available and little toxicity, and a safe drug that mitigates the development of the disease.
I think there are two very powerful messages from what you've just shared. Is one, don't give up hope. The first treatment that you found wasn't the right one for you because of the tox profile, but you were able to leverage your genetic information to find a second alternative that so far has been effective. So I think that's something that everyone should keep in mind, is that identifying potential treatments, even if the first one doesn't work, it doesn't mean that you won't find the one that does. And also, I think the genetic component is something that we should really talk about. Genomes England and other initiatives that are driven by governments have been quite good at prioritizing rare disease. I mean, the advent of whole genome sequencing is opening up new doors for diagnosis that were previously closed and are now nearly affordable for all and routine use. So what are your thoughts about the role that governments and policies have to play in prioritizing rare disease? Because ultimately, if some of the market pressures aren't there yet, governments can certainly help.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. The regulatory aspect is hugely important for rare diseases, and It's also worth noting that rare diseases it's kind of a recent thing. I mean, they've always been there, but we've only recently been able to identify them better using genome sequencing and commoditization of genome sequencing as well. They became quite cheap to do so. So I think it is a pretty recent thing that the regulatory bodies are still trying to catch up on this phenomena, that we might all have a different thing. um, so in terms of I think that a big hurdle for lots of rare diseases is the regulatory approval process. And I think it's really important to understand that there are really good reasons for that approval process to be there. But there are also maybe risks people want to take themselves that maybe the regulatory bodies are not so excited about, right? So it's a bit of an ongoing discussion, I think, where that goes. For example, I had brain surgery to remove one of the tumors. That was a risky surgery, but the surgeon made a case to do it, and I could choose if I wanted to take that risk or not. Those things are, those things are not easy to kind of regulate, like how, because anyone can come up with some therapy that they are excited about, but and the patients themselves is a very vulnerable group, and they might not have any other options. So you need someone to help make these decisions, I think. In terms of genome sequencing, like one thing that kind of bothered me quite a bit was we are doing this genetic testing on gene panels, and the testing data is usually generated more for clinical purposes, validating that you have a certain mutation or not. But I've always thought that wouldn't it be nice if we do that based on whole genome sequencing? So we also generate some research data that we can then pull together and use to understand the genetics better from the population that has the disease. So I think maybe that is slowly going to happen, but then insurance companies need to pay for the extra cost for the whole genome sequencing, data transfer limitations. So there are things that are in the way of that, but I think there is always, if you look at the system holistically, you're like, why don't we do this? And it turns out there are always reasons for it. And yeah, I think that is what we as a community need to hack. We need to figure out ways to get what we need using the systems that are already in place. It's easy to say, like, from scratch, this is what we would do, but we are not operating in a from scratch society, right? And there are advantages also to be in this society. We wouldn't have the medicine that we have today if it wasn't for that.
No, that's so true. And I can speak from my own personal experience, although I'm not suffering from any rare diseases myself. When I was looking to have kids last year, we underwent a genetic screen, my partner and I, and it turns out that I'm a carrier for 3 different autosomal recessive rare diseases, which I'd never even heard of before. And it really brought home the message to me that it's not just, the rare disease patients, it's something that could affect anyone, anywhere. And it made me that much more aware of the rare disease space and the importance of genetics and access to whole genome sequencing. We have a question from the audience. Onno, do you look forward to a time where further rare disease patients will have access to whole genome sequencing? And also, will there be any challenges that come along with it? From Jamila Gordon. Thank you, Jamila. So again, do you look forward to a time when whole genome sequencing is truly democratized and there's better access? And what do you think are going to be some additional challenges that come along with that?
Yeah, I think it is relatively commoditized. It is not super expensive to do. It's still quite hard to get it done, and get the data somewhere. But even if you cross these hurdles, the biggest challenge is to interpret the data and do the computational work on it. So it's something we sometimes do at Rarebase for research, right? We collect samples and we sequence people, and then build a bit of a genetic data bank. But then doing the actual computational work and transferring the data to people that know what to do with it, what to look for, that is where it really becomes costly. So generating the data is a starting point, and yeah, unfortunately, a starting point only. So we might at some point get better tools to look at the data, where you can more easily do it at home, do it yourself, or democratizes the tools. But that is the current challenge: how to interpret the data.
You're right. Analysis is key. And it seems like the industry, everything is developing in parallel. So on the side of solutions, once you've understood what the genetic profile is, there's a classical kind of drugs that have been pre-market approved, but what about nutraceuticals and more like alternative therapies for rare disease? Do you think that there is scope for being able to exploit and explore those further than what maybe has been done classically in mainstream pharma?
Yeah, so it's actually interesting. Lots of the drugs we have available now come from nature. Like the molecules were discovered in nature and then later synthesized. So including the drug I'm taking now, it comes from the Easter Islands originally, in the bacterium that was discovered, which makes sense, right? Because we are a part of nature. We tend to forget that. Like I think as human beings, we think we are separate from it, but it's not true. Like we are 100% part of it. So to me, it's not strange that a lot of molecules that interact with our system are found in nature, because we are one with nature and we are part of it. That being said, like nature produces all kinds of molecules. Some of them are poisonous, some of them may be good for you. So it's like something. The fact that it is coming from nature doesn't mean it's good for you. So yeah, and I think in the drug repurposing and drug discovery, we should test for all kinds of molecules and test large libraries, including stuff that you can take off the shelf. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, it does. It does. I think all options are on the table, and there's a big opportunity that you've outlined for rethinking where we source those solutions from when it comes to rare disease. And I think too often in the kind of I call it the mainstream pharma solution space, they might not be pursuing certain avenues. That all avenues are on the table for rare disease, right? Because you take away that commercial aspect so much, and it's more about healing the patient, and that's the primary driver. So Onno,
yeah,
we have
and
another.
it can be to add to that. It can be that there is a vitamin that's good for you with a certain disease, or that you have certain deficiencies or something. But I think the appeal to these kinds of things is that they are available on the shelf, right? You can just get them. But that is what you would do also with like drug repurposing and finding drugs that are already on the shelf.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. We have another audience question, this time from Claire Sargent. Could a group with the same disease, where there is no known genetic component, get whole genome sequencing done to see if there was a genetic link? And if so, how many patients would you need? So this comes back to the concept of whole genome sequencing being a driver. So I suppose, what are your thoughts, Onno? I mean, obviously there are patients out there who might have similar phenotypes, but they don't really know what the genetic component is. Is there a way to connect them and try to fund the sequencing to figure out what's going on?
Yep, that's possible. I think discovering if it is true that there is a genetic component to it, which is not for all diseases the case, right? But there could be, if there is one, it's usually valuable to know that. So where I would start is just doing some research if people already tried to find this and what they have done exactly. And then, foundations or patient communities or groups, they can come together and fund the work to collect the data, and then also fund the work to interpret and try to find some useful information in that data. It's kind of hard to say how many samples you need. I would say like just how many can you get, and work with it. So, for example, the hackathon that I did, the Google hackathon I mentioned earlier, it was usually only my sample, and there was still a lot people could do with it. That traditionally people maybe you would hear that, oh yeah, you need millions of or like thousands of samples, but if you don't have it, you just don't have it. So you work with what you got, and I think designing the experiments correctly, checking what already has been done, uh, grouping people together, and then it's possible to generate this data and do that research.
We have another great question from the audience from Natasha Leskowski. Apologies if I've mispronounced your name, but the question is around data anonymity. So Natasha is asking, going forward, do you think it is more important improving data anonymization techniques or instead redefining data privacy? So essentially, is it, if you had to weigh up the issue, is it more about making this data anonymous and protecting the identity of the individual? Or is it about getting people more comfortable with how we define privacy to begin with? Maybe it's a combination of two. What do you think on it?
Yeah, like if you talk about whole genome sequencing, it's like anonymizing your fingerprint. It's kind of not possible because your genome is very unique to you. So you cannot really, you can scramble it, but then you're probably removing information that you don't want to remove. So anonymization isn't possible. What you can do, of course, is remove the patient identifiers. So you can say, well, this is data from an NF2 patient, but you don't disclose where they live or what their name is or their exact birth date is. That's called de-identification, but that's not the same as anonymization. So for rare disease, it is anyway a bit of a controversial topic, because if you have a ultra rare disease with 50 patients identified, and the country and their year of birth and maybe one or two symptoms, you can already trace them back in a way. So I think it is something that we as a community have to kind of be aware of this and keep it seriously. Privacy is really an important thing, but at some point, um, the idea of moving research further faster is more important than a complete, like trying to completely anonymize this data.
And it sounds like going to reputable partners like Allstripes and Rarebase is a great way for people to get more comfortable about sharing their data and not being so concerned with those privacy issues.
Yeah, I think it is really important for those companies to take care of your privacy, because it's a big concern that everybody has. So there lots of measures are in place to ensure people's privacy and de-identification. But there is always the world has risks, and there is a risk there. So I think people need to make up their own mind about it. But for example, with the hackathon, basically, I gave my whole genome to 400 people that were working on it. So they all agreed to, if they weren't going to continue studying it, to delete my data. but who knows? Like, right? Like, there are probably people that didn't or forgot about it. So that was a risk I was completely willing to take. I was like, that, there was something more important happening, that I prioritized over that. And but yeah, everybody can make those choices themselves. And I think, yeah, going to reputable groups, everybody will have this in mind and have policies and procedures to ensure privacy.
So if there's people listening here or in the wider world and they want to help, whether or not they're directly affected by rare diseases or they're just really keen to support the cause, what's the best way for them to get involved?
Um, yeah, there are a few thoughts here. Like, I think I always like to see how people use their own background and professional skills coming into the rare disease space, to see how they can like apply the things that they already know and learned before, how they can apply it to the rare disease space. So there are so many examples. There was this person that needed to raise money, for example, for the cause, and she turned out to be a marathon runner, and she is now using that as a way to fundraise. But yeah, people that have a marketing background, they like, how can I bring more awareness to the rare disease space? So that's the personal side. Um, yeah, with Rarebase, I tell people, like, Rarebase needs a problem and the funding to work on it, and then out comes the results. So it's like an equation, but it's true. Like, we all have a problem. Like, we have our rare disease, and we are trying to find adequate treatments. But in the rare disease space in particular, in order to get uh, over the hump and really be part of the more industry game, there needs to be funding that is non-commercial, like raised by families and the community, in order to make it more interesting. So that is a big deal, I think, like helping with fundraising, helping the foundations fundraise for them to support the research is really key as well. And then, of course, the professional, um, involving, professionals to help you decide where to put that money, because you can usually only invest it once, unless there is like unlimited source. Like, you have to be really mindful about where you put your dollars. So that's another important part where we can maybe help each other, and yeah, the professional community coming in.
Makes sense. And I hope that everybody listening has been inspired by you as I have been, Onno. I think it's been a real great pleasure. I can imagine that there are multiple people who would love to get in touch with you. What's the best way to follow up if they want to learn more, or if they have any questions to ask you directly? How can they get in touch?
Yeah, like, if you have more questions or whatever, want to chat, you can send me an email, for example. It's my first name, Onno, at first last name.com, Onno at onnofaber.com. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. So yeah, wherever you can find me, just feel free to reach out, and I'll be as responsive as I can.
Fantastic. And Onno, we've got 1 minute left. What's the final thought you want to leave with the audience?
Yeah, I've always been a big advocate for taking a very collaborative approach, especially in the rare disease space. Someone from Disney told me that we used to have single hero stories like Superman fixing the world all like on his own, and we kind of have moved to a narrative with more multi-hero stories in the movie industry, like the Avengers, for example. And I really liked that metaphor for the rare disease community, because I think it's really key to think of this with as like a community as a whole, and try to be helpful and find as many ways to collaborate together as possible. I want to leave it at that.
Excellent, Onno. And to all the superheroes in the audience, thank you again for joining us. And Onno, thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jason.